What is Killua's true potential? Could he be the strongest Zoldyck ever? Let's talk about it. All right, so first of all, I got to give a shout out to Myth, who inspired this video today and wanted me to talk about these Zoldyck family abilities and then also Killua's strength. So let's start by quickly going through the whole family. Okay, so we're just going to go from oldest to youngest to knock these out, which means we're starting with Maha Zoldyck. And Maha is a very interesting character because it might also be Zig Zoldyck. And Zig Zoldyck is the one that went to the Dark Continent with Netero. Now, are Maha and Zig the same person for sure? No, we really have no idea because we don't know much about this character at all. And I put out a whole video on this for those of you interested in more of the details. But because we don't know too much about him, we don't know what his ability is, but the data book classifies him as an enhancer. But take that with a massive grain of salt because the data book is unreliable and has been wrong about people's affinities in the past. Next up, we've got Grandpa Zeno Zoldyck, and he is a nin emitter. And basically, all of his abilities and Hatsus take the shape of a dragon in some form or fashion. We see him wield this against Crollo. We have the dragon dive bomb attack against the Chimera Ant Castle, and so on and so forth. He's one of only a few characters in the entire series that has reached the ultimate level of nin mastery within their affinity. Togashi revealed, I think, 7 or 8 characters had reached such a level. Next up, we've got Silva Zoldyck, Killua's father, who is currently the head of the clan. And just like his father Zeno, he too is a nin emitter. And basically, we've only ever seen him do this DBZ style of attack. Next up, we've got Kikyo Zoldyck, who is Zoldyck in name only because she married into the family. This is Silva's wife. And we don't know too much about her, but the data book classifies her as a manipulator. But of course, we got to take that with a grain of salt. But it would make sense because the vast majority of the Zoldyck clan is either an emitter or a manipulator. An emitter, like their father, or perhaps a manipulator, like their mother. But yeah, that's really all we know. Next, kicking off the Zoldyck children, we have the eldest in Illumi, and he is a manipulator, and this guy is terrifying. He can do a number of things with these needles. He can insert them into himself and completely transform his appearance, but he can also transform without the needles. It just won't last as long. But the real horror comes when he uses these on other people because he can manipulate them in a number of ways. He can insert these into your brain and subtly influence the way you think and act, or he can just jab them into people and straight up control them as his puppets. And he can do this to both living people and corpses. Definitely one of the most terrifying Zoldicks. Next up, we've got Miluki, and he too is a manipulator, but he skews a little bit towards specialization on the nin affinity spectrum. And as far as his ability, we don't really have any idea because we've never seen him in an actual fight, but we do know that he loves technology. He's always hacking on the computer. He's always crafting and inventing different devices. So I would imagine that his ability may fall somewhere in line with that, but it's anyone's guess at this point. Then next up, we got the kid himself, Killua, who is a bit of an anomaly compared to the rest of his family because he's not an emitter or a manipulator, but rather a transmuter, which means he transmutes his aura into other things to wield. So his ability primarily revolves around the fact that he transforms his aura into lightning. And his main ability, I would say, is Godspeed, where he basically uses that lightning and courses it all throughout his body to increase his reaction time, his muscle twitch fibers, his speed, but he uses it in a ton of different ways. I do want to mention, while he is a transmuter, he actually skews towards enhancement on the nin affinity spectrum. Next up, we've got Aluka Zoldyck, and Aluka is actually a nin specialist. Now, I just mentioned that Killua was the anomaly since he's not an emitter or a manipulator, so you might say, well, Aluka should be one too, but I think this is a little bit different because Aluka is a specialist mostly due to the fact that Aluka is a conduit or a medium for Nanika, which is the Dark Continent calamity that is possessing Aluka. So that is why Aluka is as powerful as they are, because they have this wish-granting beast within them, essentially. But Togashi does classify Aluka and not Nanika as the specialist, but it's because of Nanika. And finally, that leaves us with the youngest member of the family, Kaluto Zoldyck. And Kaluto is a manipulator, and all of their abilities that we've seen thus far revolve around this paper. So One facet that we've seen allows Kaluto to create a little paper doll of someone, and then they can basically spy on that person from afar, basically being able to hear anything that happens around them. Then the other ability that we've seen, which is more offensive, is basically the ability to control all of these tiny shards of paper with like gusts of wind and attack with them. All right, so now let's talk about Killua. He's obviously not the strongest member of the family right now, and honestly, he's pretty far from it. So could he become the strongest member of the family, and what evidence do we have that points to that? And if he does, just what kind of peak are we talking about here? All right, so first, let's classify Killua's talent. Why is he considered to be potentially the strongest Zoldyck ever? And first and foremost, we know that he is just an insane nin talent off the jump, considered to be 1 in 10 million by Master Wing. But I do want to point out that this line is not canon because this actually wasn't said in the manga. This was only in the anime. However, the same sentiment was in the manga, that these two are just insanely talented. It's just that a specific number wasn't given to it. Beyond that, we know that Killua is being groomed to become the next head of the Zoldyck family, even though he is not the eldest Zoldyck child, nor is he even the second eldest Zoldyck child. So he has obviously been specifically chosen based upon the potential his parents see in him. And it's not just a case of Killua being the parents' favorite or anything, it is based on his potential, because you can see in this scene here where Miluki is pissed that Killua gets special treatment, and Zeno simply responds, well, it's because he is special. And it's also not a case of Killua just being the most talented in this generation, because in this same scene, Miluki goes on to say, yeah, he's probably the most talented Zoldyck in history, right? Even Mom thinks so, and I have to agree. All right, so let's say Killua is the most talented Zoldyck in history. What is his actual ceiling? Well, the best we can look at is the heights that previous Zoldicks have reached. So I think we've got 3 feats, if I can call it that will help us classify the Zoldyck strength here. And obviously, to begin with, we're dealing with the most infamous assassin family in the world. So our baseline is already sky high, right? But beyond that, first and foremost, we have Zeno, whom, like I mentioned, is one of only 7 or 8 nin users alive right now that has reached the ultimate level of their nin. So Killua can probably also reach that level, right? In addition to that, we have 2 members of the Zoldicks that are currently members of the Phantom Troop, the most infamous the most infamous criminal gang in the world, right? And one of these members is a child still, and they're already a part of that group. The other being Illumi, who is one of the strongest members of the Phantom Troop. And speaking of Illumi's strength, he has gotten the highest score we have ever seen Hisoka give on his personal rating score with a 95. That's higher than even the Zodiacs that Hisoka was ranking. And again, this is Illumi, the one that was passed over to become clan head because he had less potential than Killua. And then finally, remember this geezer, Maha or Zig Zoldyck? And you may not buy the fact that Maha is Zig, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this, because even if they're different people, they're both still Zoldicks, right? And Zig Zoldyck went to the Dark Continent with Netero and survived, and that's obviously no easy feat. But then on top of that, Maha has one of the most impressive feats in the series. And that's because Zeno Zoldyck tells us a story about how Netero is the only one to have fought his grandfather and lived to tell the tale. He's the only one to fight my grandpa and survive. And let's break that down a little bit, because he wasn't talking about Grandpa Netero, not the version that we saw fight Meruem, who classified himself as half as strong as he used to be. No, he would have been talking about Prime Netero. A Prime Netero fought his grandfather and survived. And the way he classified that was that Netero survived. So not that my grandpa managed to survive against a Prime Netero, but the other way around, right? So that's how strong this guy was. And Killua, as the most potential Zoldyck ever, would be above him. So long story short, Killua is an absolute freak of nature whose potential is literally off the charts. But I mean, is that surprising because he's one of the MCs? I just hope we get a time jump at some point, or at least a glimpse into the future, so that we can see what a prime Killua would look like, because as I'm sure you all know by now, he's also my favorite character, so I would love to see that. Anyways, y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Another shout out to my guy Myth. Thank you so much for the support, man, and thank you guys for watching.